Some people believe Henry Ford invented the first car. Others believe that he invented the assembly line, but he didn't. So why is he so famous? Well, Henry Ford had this idea that everyone in America should be able to afford a car. To make this a reality, he revolutionized the car manufacturing process. The innovations he made didn't just change the car-making business, but also helped America's 20th century middle class take off. Join us on a ride through Ford's history. It's 1875, Michigan, USA. Young Henry Ford is just 12 years old when he experiences two events that will majorly impact his life. His father gives him a watch and he sees the operation of a Nichols and Shepard steam engine tractor on a country road. Henry has grown up on a farm in Greenfield, Michigan. This is the first vehicle other than horse-drawn he has ever seen. The next year, he successfully repairs a friend's watch. Taking it apart, he extracts a sliver from its working. He quickly gains a reputation as a watch repairman amongst neighbors and friends. He hates farming, but he loves machines. 3 years later, he leaves the farm to work as an apprentice machinist in Detroit, but returns in 1882. He does little farming. Instead, he operates and services engines used by farmers. He thinks farm animals consume far too much hay and oats and believes farming should become more mechanized to make it easier for farmers. He attempts to make a farm tractor before he gets into making cars. During this time, he marries the daughter of a neighboring farmer, Clara Bryant. She will become an active suffrage fighting for the rights of women to vote. In 1891, they moved to Detroit, where Henry, without any formal studies, gets a job as a mechanical engineer with the Edison Illuminating Company. In his home workshop, he continues to build engines. Fast forward to 1896. Henry is now 32 years old. He has become chief engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company. He also completes his first automobile, which he calls the quadricycle, because it runs on 4 bicycle tires. It's powered by a 2-cylinder ethanol engine that produces 4 horsepower. It has only 2 forward speeds with no reverse gear. After various test drives, it records a top speed of 20 miles an hour. He sells it for $200 and goes on to build another 2. Now he has come up with the idea of a low-price car for ordinary Americans. Most people think cars are only for the rich, but not Henry Ford. He attends a convention of the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies at the Oriental Hotel on Manhattan Beach in Brooklyn. There he is introduced to Thomas Alva Edison, who sees his plans for a gasoline automobile and encourages him to continue. Let's pause here. This is Thomas Edison. He has often been described as America's greatest inventor. The same guy who gave us the light bulb. And it wasn't just the light bulb. He also invented the phonograph and the motion picture camera. Well, he didn't actually invent the motion picture camera. He bought the rights from a Frenchman, but that's another story. Ever thought about where the phrase light bulb moment comes from? Yes, Thomas Edison. The funny thing is, we often think inventors sit alone when that light bulb moment suddenly happens. But Edison was, in fact, one of the first inventors to apply teamwork to invention. So he applied principles of process, which allowed inventors to work together. We'll see later in the story how he and Henry worked together to produce an affordable electric vehicle. We know now they weren't successful at the time, which makes us wonder why. But let's continue on Ford's journey. After meeting Edison, Henry shows him his designs for an internal combustion engine. Edison encourages Henry to carry on, even though he believes the future is in electric cars. Turns out he was right. He was just ahead of his time by 100 years or so. It's now 1899. Ford leaves the Edison Illuminating Company to start his own company, the Detroit Motor Company. The following year, he releases his first vehicle, a gasoline-powered delivery truck. It gets great reviews, but is unreliable and slow. In an effort to get sales, the company creates a catalog that compares the cost of running the vehicle to the cost of a horse and carriage. Despite the effort, the company fails, but Ford tries again with the Henry Ford Company. By now, he has built a 26 horsepower race car. He competes in a 10-lap race at the 1-mile oval of the Detroit Driving Club and beats Alexander Winton, the top race car driver of the era, who is driving a 70-horsepower racer. He uses the money he wins at the race to fund this new company. But it fails too because investors feel he's spending too much time on auto racing. So he leaves the company with the rights to his name and $900. But he leaves behind the plans for the commercial car he's been working on. Henry Leland, who's working at the Henry Ford Company, thinks the plans will work. He successfully convinces the investors to continue with the business and launch the car. They changed the name of the company to Cadillac, named after the French explorer who founded Detroit in 1701. Ford, in the meantime, finds some more investors to start a third company. Two of his investors are the brothers John and Horace Dodge, who will later start their own car company. You can guess what that is. Will the third time be lucky for Ford? The name of the new company says it all, the Ford Motor Company. Ford is not president at the beginning because his investors have concerns that he might leave the company. Who can blame them with his track record? But now we'll see how this changes. Ford Motor Company launches in 1903, and the same year the Ford Model A is released. It's practically identical to the model that Cadillac launched a few months prior. This is hardly surprising since they use Henry's designs. This begins a lifelong grudge Henry will hold against Henry Leland. Much later in the story, we will see how he gets his revenge. But first, let's pause for a moment. Why was Detroit home to so many giants in the motor industry? In the space of just a few years, we got all these car makers starting up in Detroit. There's Ford, Cadillac, Dodge, and Lincoln, which Henry Leland went on to start a few years later. Why does Motor City, or Motown as Detroit becomes known, become the global center of the automotive industry? A key reason is location. It's along the Great Lakes Waterway, a major port and transportation hub. So this is how it happens. You get one motor company setting up their business there. They train and attract workers. Now motor company number 2 has set up shop. Detroit isn't the only transportation hub in the country, of course, but they've also got a skilled workforce. So motor company number 2 pulls in. Now you got even more skilled workers and the cycle continues. Before long, you've got a whole lot of motor companies across the road from each other. The same thing happened in Silicon Valley in the 1990s as it turned into a global hub for technology. But let's get back to our story. The Ford Motor Company is taking off. 1,750 Model A cars are made through 1903 to 1904. That's a few cars a day. 2 or 3 men work on each car. More models are released and more are sold each year. Then, in 1908, the Model T is released. By 1908, there are only 18,000 miles of paved road in the United States. So Henry uses light and strong vanadium steel alloy to build the critical parts of the vehicle. His cars will not be frivolous fun cars for the rich, but real hard-working, reliable cars for the mass market. It's a huge success. In its first year, over 10,000 models are produced, and a few years later the number rises to 170,211. Before the model is retired in 1927, 15 million would be sold, making it one of the best-selling vehicles of all time. It is considered by most to be the most important car ever made. But that still isn't enough for Henry. He's looking for ways to make cars more affordable. In part 2, we will learn how he speeds things up with the world's first moving car assembly line. Henry doesn't invent the assembly line, but he makes huge improvements to it. We'll see in part 2 how the moving assembly line changes the world forever. And that's not all Ford does. He also surprises everyone by doubling his workers' pay. So lots more exciting stuff is coming up in part 2. If you liked this episode, please support us by sharing the video.